welcome you to another exciting lecture in our series of lectures on influential and important women of the Middle Ages and Renaissance. I'd like to thank the Project Humanities at ASU for supporting this, as well as the program in Gender and Women's Studies. Thank you all for attending. And I invite you to join us for some light refreshments over to your left after the talk, where you can also talk about more medieval and Renaissance things if you choose to. I'm very pleased as well to introduce you to our speaker for tonight. She's someone that some of you may already be familiar with. Have any of you been to her lecture previously, the one last time? Just not that many, that's great. She gave a talk a few months ago in this series as well, and her name is Dr. Diane Facinelli. Oh, one other question. How many of you are here for the first time? Wow, that's amazing. No, to the series. To the series. To this series, yes. If you didn't RSVP, would you mind signing up on our sign-in sheet over by the cookies? Then we can remind you of things to come. We'd appreciate that very much. Dr. Diane Facinelli. Diane was my first doctoral student in the English department at ASU, which I'm very proud of, and I'm sure she's very annoyed that I mention every time I get a chance. And she went on to distinguish herself here at ASU, chiefly in Barrett, the Honors College, where she's been principal lecturer since 2009. She's also been assistant dean for academic advising there, was the assistant director of the Office of National Scholarship Advisement, and the Resource Center Director for the Arizona Humanities Council, which she has served in various other capacities as well. Her clear thinking, her analytical capabilities, and her congenial personality have made her a sought-after colleague and professional for numerous administrative posts and committees on and off campus. And her stellar teaching abilities made her a finalist for the ASU Parents Association Professor of the Year Award in 2000. That is her stellar teaching abilities, which you'll witness shortly, and her copious administrative abilities were instrumental in my inviting her to become the director of the ACMRS summer program at the University of Cambridge, and that was 2 years ago. And then this past summer, she was the inaugural director for our program at the University of Oxford, and it all went very well. Tonight, and I think she's happy in that position. She's smiling currently. Tonight, she will happily speak to us on one of her main research interests. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Diane Facinelli, talking to us about three queens.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the 12th century. At least that's where we'll be in the next hour or so. Why the 12th century? Well, sorry, I want to make sure it's working okay. The 12th century is when, for the first time in the Western world, you really had an emphasis suddenly placed on not just kingship, but now all of a sudden queenship. Yeah, which spell check will catch every single time you type it in. What does it mean to be a woman with power, a woman with rule? And it is in the 12th century that two historical queens started really making a name for themselves and helping people to decide, wait, we should think about these people and how much influence they can have on the world, and what do we do with this odd animal that wants to rule, but it's female? And then at the same time that these two women were very, very active, the Arthurian legend really took off in the 12th century as well, and especially with the development of the character of Guinevere. And so it's, people have drawn parallels between them. I don't know that, there was an influence, but I think there is at least a reflection that at this time period, people were looking at queens as strong people and deciding that they're worthy of something, some attention on their own, and what does all of this mean. So just start out looking at what influence these women did have, and when we do that, we have to start out really with Matilda. I think is what we're starting out with, yes. With Matilda, I shouldn't wander away from the microphone. I'm sorry, I'm a peripatetic teacher sometimes. A little bit of a background. Not everybody in the family is mentioned there, unless if you didn't become an important person, you weren't on this particular one. But you can see from William the Conqueror, William I in England, how it all works down so that Matilda and Eleanor, by the way, are related. Yeah. Matilda is the mother-in-law of Eleanor. And so, these fearless females did have a connection with each other. We don't know how close that connection was actually personally, or how much they got along, but they certainly were involved in the development of the monarchy and the new monarchy under the Normans in England and what was going on. So, with Matilda, or Maude. You'll see her listed as both. Matilda is the usual one, is the Latin form of her name, and she comes down in most of the chronicles as being named. She was Lady of England, she was Queen of Germany, and she was the Holy Roman Empress. And she almost took the throne of England in the 1140s. Not quite, and we'll find out what happened. Her role as would-be queen was initiated by her father, really, as makes sense, Henry I of England, who was the third son of William the Conqueror. Now, how did he get to be king if he was the third son? Well, it gets complicated too, because with the Normans, they brought over a number of things, like these wonderful big castles. That became the norm. If you've ever seen the White Tower in the Tower of London, for instance, those wonderful castles that now we associate with the Middle Ages. The Normans brought those over. They also brought over the idea of primogeniture. In other words, that my throne will then be passed on down to my eldest son. But that still doesn't answer the question of how the third son got to be... there we go, a little bit of that. Got to be the King of England. It's a little bit of the realm of William the Conqueror. You get an idea of it. It's not only most of what today's England, but also Normandy, because he came from Normandy. Well, William, when he took over, had 3 sons. When he is deciding, what am I going to give to all these sons? The eldest is Robert. I'll give him Normandy and start that out. The next son, who interesting was named William, also William II. There are going to be so many Henrys and Williams here. Stick with me on this one. He was, if it helps any, he was also called William Rufus, because apparently he had a very ruddy complexion, so that helps. And then the youngest son, Henry. Okay. Well. What happened with Henry I? He of course, didn't say I want to be king, but there was this hunting accident. Okay, you have William Rufus, his older brother. He's king. He sort of took everything over because he was there. He took over the treasury at Winchester, and had himself crowned king. And then he said, okay, at one point, let's go hunting, because that's what kings do. And so he went on a hunting expedition to the New Forest, which is not far from Winchester, by the way. One of the people in the hunting expedition happened to be his younger brother, Henry. And hunting accidents happen. And William ended up with an arrow through his head, because kings and deers often, they look alike. So it's still not sure who killed, who, you didn't know the arrow was actually that the bow was loaded. But we do know that Henry made a really fast trip down to Winchester right after this happened. It's like, oh, he's dead. And then he rode off, secured the treasury, and then went on to, there he is, went on to London, to Westminster to be crowned king. And so that's how he became king. So that kind of set a bit of a precedent too of, well, you're not really supposed to be king, but it works because, by the way, my elder brother Robert is in prison somewhere in France, and I'm not going to let him out either. And so, well, by all accounts, actually Henry was a really good king. He was effective, and everything seemed, all set up because he had an elder son named. Yeah. You're following me on this one. Okay, Henry. He had two legitimate children, Henry and then Matilda. But then isn't that great? That's a shipwreck. And yeah, if this happened, actually that ship would sink. The young Henry drowned in a ship accident, and it hit a rock. But according to reports, it was a conspiracy, and people wanted him dead, and they got it. But other reports say that there was a big party before they left, and it became a booze cruise. And everybody was drunk, including the people who were supposed to be steering the ship, and so they didn't see that big rock. Unfortunately, then that was the end of Henry, and we're down to Matilda. Well, what's going on with Matilda now? We need to come back to Matilda. Matilda had been sent then to Germany at the age of 8 to marry Henry there's another Henry. Henry V, who was King of Germany and Holy Roman Emperor, who was by that time 24. Now, in case you're going, oh my God, if it makes you feel any better, the legal marriage age for a woman was 12. And so she had to wait a while to actually marry him till she was much more mature at the age of 12. But she was at least crowned queen at the age of 8. People were betrothed in their cradles all the time. It's hard for us to imagine that, but yeah, that was the case. It was a very good marriage, actually, for both England and for Germany, because Henry V had a great lineage. It goes way back. He has all this background, but he was poor. They didn't have as much money. Henry I of England had lots of money, but he had no lineage. It's like, yeah, my dad just came over here and took over. So they both got what they needed. They got the sort of legitimacy, and then they got the money as well. Matilda was married just before her 12th birthday. Unfortunately, though, Henry V died in May of 1125 at the age of 38. Matilda was at that time then 23 and childless. Well, Henry I's heir had died on the White Ship. There they are, Henry IV and Matilda. Cute. So he's like, okay, now what do I do? So exactly a year after Henry V had died, Henry I of England brought his daughter back, who probably hadn't seen England actually in about 16 years. But he brought her back, and at Westminster and Windsor, he made all of the nobles take an oath that when he died, Matilda would become Queen of England, and she would rule all of his lands. They all did, and as a matter of fact, then he had them retake that oath in 1131. To solidify things, he thought, well, she needs to be in a good marriage, because a woman on her own really is vulnerable. So Henry arranged to have her marry Geoffrey of Anjou, a Frenchman. A marriage that did result in 3 sons, which was good. Okay, you have Matilda will become queen, the 3 sons then will be next in line. Everything looks very good. Their eldest son was named Henry. Just kind of want to, Todd in there somewhere. Anyway, it was not a marriage that Matilda wanted. It was a marriage her father wanted. She looked at him. He was 11 years younger and described as something of an egotistical pretty boy. And she fought the idea, but back then, if it was a marriage that worked out politically, it was a marriage that happened. And so she became a reluctant bride and an unhappy wife. It did, however, produce 3 sons. In 1135, Henry I died, but that smooth transition that he thought he had ensured did not happen. Matilda was supposed to take over, but we really don't know much about what happened except some of the basic notions of what was going on at the time. But I just want to read to you, an idea of where we are with this early queen. Not much we know about her. Not much, considering this is somebody who was supposed to be the Queen of England at this time. So as one historian put it, it is a measure of the peculiarity of Matilda's position in 1135 that we know so little about her. Her contemporaries struggle to decide how to handle or to judge her, how to place her within a political narrative that expected its chief protagonist to be male. Also, as a result, she is an insubstantial, inconsistent presence in the chronicles, rarely seen in more than 2 dimensions, often disconcertingly portrayed as a marginal figure in her own story. Chronicles would regularly, instead of really talking about her as her own person, would talk about her in terms of the qualities of her parents that she had. So, for instance, one describes her as, she displayed her father's courage and her mother's piety. Holiness in her found an equal in energy, and it would be hard to say which was more admirable. So we, as far as an in-depth portrait of her, we don't really get that. Now, there was no formal prohibition at this time against a female becoming Queen of England as the ruler of the land. The idea of a queen in Anglo-Saxon society literally meant the wife of the king. But there was nothing in there said that, the queen couldn't be the ruler of the country as well. But in Anglo-Saxon history and now in what's the nobility, the Norman history, it just really hadn't happened. So people really didn't know what to do with this queen who, other queens had run things a bit, but they ran them while their husbands were unavailable, or they ran them for a child king. So they were always ruling for a husband or for a son, not on their own. But, here it was in a situation that was very clear-cut. The father had said, yes, she should be queen. She's the eldest child, only surviving legitimate child. But it didn't happen that way for a couple reasons, besides the fact that people were going, what do we do with this particular person now who's supposed to be ruling us? One of the reasons is that when Henry died very suddenly, and he has one of the best deaths, I think, ever, it was listed as ate too many eels. Think about that next time you have sushi. Henry had on his deathbed, again, recounted, okay, Matilda is going to succeed me, she's going to be queen. But Matilda was in Anjou at this time, she wasn't in England. Immediately after Henry's death, however, she did successfully take over some castles along the border of the area that she ruled as part of her dowry. And she held them very strongly, and she used those as bases then later to launch her attacks to try to regain Normandy and England from that. But it was kind of a stroke of bad luck. She apparently became pregnant just a couple weeks with her 3rd son before Henry died. So physically she was kept from traveling from France to England to claim the throne until July of that year. And by that time, the nobles were already seeking someone to take over. Now, primogeniture had been there, but the idea is we need someone strong and in charge, and certainly the other rulers had already done that sort of thing. In other words, I'm here, I'm in charge of the money, the treasury at Winchester, and then I've had myself crowned, and that makes me king. Well, that same thing then would end up harming Matilda, because she wasn't there, and there was a strong person then who was ready to take over. It was not the person who would have been the next in line. Henry had a sister, Adela, who had had 2 sons. The eldest son was actually Tybalt. Younger son, Stephen. But he followed the wonderful pattern that had been set by so many people by saying, I want to be king, and then taking it. And so that's exactly what he did. He decided, okay, I'm coming. I made haste to England, took over the treasury, which was actually helped a lot by the fact that the Bishop of Winchester happened to be his younger brother. Family relationships can be a good thing. He rode back to London, and on December 22nd, 1135, he was crowned King of England. His claim to the throne was tenuous at best. There he is, being crowned. But, you know, might makes right, and it certainly did. It was also a problem in that the nobles said, okay, we have a strong king. He is at least related to Henry I. But also, once the coronation had taken place, most of the people were behind him, because the coronation was considered definitely a religious ceremony. So if that had been consecrated that way, he was then the designated king. So whether Matilda came or not, it didn't really matter at that time to most of them, not to everyone, that she was at least the person who was supposed to have taken over. Besides that, a lot of people thought, well, you know, Matilda also has this trouble of being married to Geoffrey of Anjou, and we don't really trust him, because the only models we have are if she's married and she comes over with him, he's going to rule things, because he's the man of that, and we're Normans, he's from Anjou, we don't trust him, we don't like him, so we'll stick with Stephen. However, Matilda had given up a lot in order to solidify not only her succession, but more importantly, the succession of her sons. She was married to a man she didn't like. She had suffered through all those things, so she wasn't about to give up. And a turning point for her actually happened in June 1138, when her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, who was the most popular and successful of Henry's numerous illegitimate children, gave up on serving Stephen because he thought he was a weak and ineffectual king, and publicly announced he was on Matilda's side, that he would help Matilda to reign. Now, this makes a lot of sense, because if you're looking at it from the 12th century point of view, Robert of Gloucester cannot be king, he's illegitimate. However, if he rules at the side of Matilda, then he takes the place, in effect, of running things. And so it won't be Geoffrey of Anjou, whom we don't really like. It would be Robert. And so that really helped her strengthen her position a great deal. What happened then as a result of that, it was a lot of fighting, and if you know anything about this time period, it's called the Anarchy. The time when, in English history, when Stephen and Matilda battled over the right to rule England. And if you have read Pillars of the Earth, or seen the miniseries, or any of the Brother Cadfael mysteries from Ellis Peters, those take place during the time of the Anarchy. So that's what's going on in the battle for who's going to run things. Well, during the struggle, Matilda had actually appealed to the Pope against Stephen as a usurper. She seemed to have a good case, but it was denied. And there's probably a very good reason for that, because 3 years earlier, the Pope had said, okay, Stephen's king. You don't really want, to go back and forth. So she was denied that, but she still kept up her claim to take over as Queen of England. That's Stephen again. Why is it so important? Well, if you look at the lands that they would get, that's quite a lot of power, certainly, that they would be in charge of. I'll show you a little feel of Matilda. That's cute, too. In 1140, which is 5 years after her father's death, Matilda was at the point of almost taking the throne. She almost had it. It was that close. What had happened is Stephen had been taken prisoner. He was her prisoner now. He was in chains, and actually they met for the first time since 10 years earlier when Stephen had knelt before her and sworn his allegiance to her as Henry's heir. Apparently he had his fingers crossed when he did that. She was in a great position. She got the church behind her, which had been behind Stephen, as they were very smart, realizing, wait, we need to change sides now. And so they publicly declared, we choose as Lady of England and Normandy the daughter of a king who was a peacemaker, a glorious king, a wealthy king, a good king, without peer in our time, and we promise her faith and support. So it appeared as though everything was good, that she was going to be queen of England finally after all of this. But as I kind of mentioned earlier, Chronicle authors really seem unsure about how to deal with Matilda. Again, she was faulted for not, at another time, quotes, showing the modest gait and bearing proper to the gentle sex. But I don't know of any king that if they showed the modest gait and bearing proper to the gentle sex would have had a whole lot of success ruling a country. As a matter of fact, Stephen, in the same work, was faulted for not being imperious enough. He was too weak. So her behavior, is said, led a lot of people to be turned off by her. They didn't like her. She probably wasn't without fault, but it's very clear that most of the complaints about her were very gendered. It's like she's either too weak or she's too strong, and we really don't like either one. It's kind of like if she uses her womanly wiles, it will be either for weakness or to work havoc upon all the men she can possibly do. It's just another clear thing that, the people just didn't know what to do with this creature. This is a king. This is a monarch, but it's a woman. We don't know how to treat her. But the end result was that she was in London awaiting her coronation. A riot broke out. London was attacked. She had to flee for safety to Oxford Castle. And once she lost London, it was all over. Any chance that she would be crowned England's monarch was effectively over at that point, and her allies, as they had done before, betrayed her because she was now in a weakened position as well. One of the things that saved Matilda, though, is she did stay. She never surrendered. She never formally surrendered. She did go back to Normandy, but what she was thinking is, okay, it's very clear I'm not going to be able to be the ruler. I have 3 sons. My emphasis now has to be on them being able to become rulers after me. If it didn't work for me, at least I have produced Henry's heirs that way. And she did ultimately succeed, certainly in that through young Henry. In 1151, he actually had returned to England at the age of 14. He had been raised there and taught there. One of the close friends of his tutor was Geoffrey of Monmouth, and so it helps explain probably why Henry was so into the Arthurian legend and really loved everything about it as well. But Henry went into England with the idea of taking over. However, he was captured. Stephen, for some reason, though, did not even imprison Henry. He didn't even, certainly didn't kill him. He sent him back to Normandy. And then Henry returned to England in 1153, having acquired a great deal of land through his marriage a year earlier to a newly divorced wife of King Louis VII, whose name happened to be Eleanor of Aquitaine. And then in late 1153, a depressed Stephen adopted Henry and named him his son and heir. Stephen's own son had already died. So on December 19th, 1154, Matilda achieved the closest goal she could possibly get in that her son became Henry II of England. And the formidable Queen Eleanor got her second queenship. It's got to be a good record. How many can you amass? Here we are, Eleanor of Aquitaine. So we'll move on to her. And to really do Eleanor of Aquitaine service, well, maybe I shouldn't use that word, to be good for her to talk about her, you would really need probably at least 4 of these talks. So we won't talk about everything about Eleanor, but we'll certainly get her to the point of, how she grew and became much, much more than Matilda was, and how she made a name for herself. She was more conventional than Matilda had been, but only in the aspect that she was queen because she was married to a king. 2 kings. So that was the only conventional part of her, but her significance and what we know about her is so much greater than Matilda. We see that development of now we're paying attention to this person who is wielding some power, but she has power behind the scenes as well. From a very early age, Eleanor attracted a great deal of attention. One was that she had a great deal of land under her disposal, or at least it would be as soon as her father died. She was the heir to all of those lands in Aquitaine. Also, she is reported, possibly more importantly, to have been stunningly beautiful. Now, it was conventional in the Middle Ages to go, everybody's gorgeous, everybody's beautiful, but Eleanor's is so effusive. Apparently, she was really, really beautiful, and she was also, hello, well, we're back there. She's also reported to have been intelligent, and I think that helped a little bit too, at least. I like to think it helps a lot. I'm not an idiot, so yeah. In 1137, at the age of 13, she became Duchess of Aquitaine, and 3 months after her father's death, in what seemed to be the perfect union, marriage made in heaven, Louis, the 17-year-old heir to the throne of France, married the 13-year-old Duchess of Aquitaine. So it was a good thing because she brought a lot of land, he brought the power. Because the King of France was the liege lord of all of France. They all owed their fealty to him, but his area of actual possession was the Ile-de-France, just the island of land, if you will, around Paris. So compared with the land that Eleanor brought, it was very, very, very small, although he had the power. She got the power that way, and he got the land. So that worked out well. And so in 1137, Louis VII was crowned king, and Eleanor crowned queen at the same time in the same ceremony. Louis was not really perfectly suited to the role of king or husband, apparently. He was a second son. His elder brother, however, had died when Louis was 11. As a second son, he had been trained for the church, and that was really his profession. That was really what he was good at and what he loved. And later, according to gossip, Eleanor would remark to a friend that Louis was more monk than king, and coming from Eleanor, that was not a compliment. He, however, was apparently besotted, just, like a little puppy dog. He was so in love with his beautiful and vivacious Eleanor. From the start, though, the union between a boy raised by monks and the granddaughter of a licentious troubadour was not a meeting of minds. She was very worldly, he was not. She did, however, at least fulfill, after 8 years, her wifely duty by producing a child, but she didn't even get that right, because in 1145 she produced Marie. Yeah, a girl. Her eldest daughter. 2 years after that, in a fervent display of religious devotion, and actually because he felt very guilty over some atrocities that had been committed by his army during a war, Louis decided to go on the ill-fated Second Crusade in 1147. And he decided to take with him a full retinue of people, including noble women and his wife. And the reports are that you couldn't believe how much baggage she had. But you have to have a new outfit for every day. The group arrived in Antioch in 1148, where Eleanor's uncle Raymond was sort of the governor of the area at that time. And that's when the wheels really started coming off the marriage, and Eleanor gained the reputation which would follow her for the rest of her life as well. Raymond and Eleanor spent a great deal of time together, chatting or whatever. And when Louis attempted to move on to Jerusalem, she said, "No, you didn't do that." That was, for a queen to say, "I'm not going on with you, I'm going to stay here with my uncle," that was scandalous in itself. But it was also the time when she first voiced her desire to have an annulment. And she cited as a reason that she and Louis were related to the 4th and 5th degrees. Back in their history, they had common ancestors way back. And so this was against the church law. They should not have been married. I want an annulment. She wanted some way out of the marriage. And according to the chronicles that were written about the time, at least they say that she had a torrid affair with Raymond at that time. We don't know, but what really matters is the reputation she got, and that she was already being feisty by saying, "No, I'm not going. I have a mind of my own, and I want a divorce now." She at last was compelled to go to Jerusalem with Louis. Afterwards, though, she did petition Pope Eugenius III for an annulment. He denied it. Louis was ecstatic because for some reason he was still desperately in love with her and wanted to stay together. 2 years after she first attempted to attain an annulment, she gave birth again. And this could have been a major event, except that the child suffered from the same genetic defect as the earlier child. It was a daughter, Alex. And so you still had the problem. It seemed like a problem. It was a problem for Louis. It may have been the saving grace for Eleanor. If she had had a son, she would have had to stay married to Louis to ensure that her son could take over as King of France. She also would have lost the Duchy of Aquitaine, that's what her name is, yeah. At the same time. And so she would have been stuck in that marriage. However, Louis then started seeing things a little differently because he had a wonderful example just across the English Channel, because Matilda and Stephen were fighting at that time, of what would happen if you died and you only had a daughter to take over from you. So he desperately wanted a son. Rumor has it, and it could be true, we don't know at all, that she realized this and from that point on refused to allow Louis into her bed. In other words, the marriage was in name only because she didn't want to take the chance, possibly, and these are conjectures, of having a son and therefore being tied to him because she still wanted the annulment. Whatever it was, and it probably was a concern over the succession, because Louis never said anything about adultery at all in his dealings with Eleanor. He finally agreed to an annulment, and in 1152, Eleanor became a free woman. Now, it seems to reinforce the likelihood that she had cut off all relationship with Louis shortly after the birth of Alex in order to get an annulment, because that was it was in year before her annulment became final or became accepted, that she met Henry of Anjou. He visited Paris to make a peace treaty with King Louis, and Henry was the son of Matilda and Geoffrey of Anjou. And Geoffrey had made Henry the Duke of Normandy in 1150, so he came on a diplomatic mission. Oh, there's him, sorry. And there's Eleanor again, a seal of Eleanor. It's kind of like her by the grace of God, Queen of England, and Duchess of Aquitaine. Now, this event was much different from what happened to Matilda. Matilda was forced into a marriage with Geoffrey of Anjou, she didn't want. She didn't want anything to do with this guy. But according to all of the chronicles written about this time when Eleanor met Henry, well, as one of them put it, Henry cast lustful eyes on her and she cast unchaste eyes on him. Henry was much more to her liking than Louis had been, and apparently she had made up her mind shortly after their initial meeting that this was going to be her second husband. And according to at least Gerald of Wales, Henry committed adultery with Eleanor during this peerage visit. Here's Eleanor again. Yeah, she is pretty. Geoffrey of Anjou, this is a very bad picture of him, apparently, because he is reported to have been absolutely gorgeous, a stunning beauty in his own way. He's the egotistical pretty boy that Matilda was forced to marry. However, before he died, Geoffrey is reported to have told Henry, "Don't marry Eleanor, whatever you do." And according to Gerald of Wales, the reason for his desire to keep them apart was the fact that Geoffrey, and Eleanor, years before, had interfaced. If you put it in computer terms, it seems a lot nicer. We don't know, again, if that's true or not, however, but it's possible, and certainly do know that Geoffrey had many mistresses. He produced many illegitimate children. One of Henry's half-brothers, as a matter of fact, is reported to be Marie de France, who wrote many lays, songs, for Eleanor and Henry later, including at least 4 on the Arthurian theme as well. But, okay, as I mentioned before, Eleanor was now a free woman, but it wasn't all that great to be a free woman in 1152, especially if you had a lot of land. One way to take land was to take the person who owned it, and she actually narrowly escaped 2 abduction attempts. If you grab her and force her to marry you, you get her land. It's not terribly romantic, obviously, but I guess whatever works is what's going to happen. Her dangerous position may actually be a reason why it was only 8 weeks and 2 days after her annulment that 28-year-old Eleanor married 19-year-old Henry, the teenage son of Empress Matilda. So, as mentioned before, on December 19th, 1154, Eleanor and Henry were crowned king and queen. Second time Eleanor gets to be queen. Now, 15 years of marriage to Louis had produced 2 daughters and a whole lot of scandal. First 15 years of her marriage with Henry produced 8 children, 5 of them boys. 8, yeah. The eldest son died, I think only at the age of 3 or so. But yeah, she seemed a lot more prolific at that point. She obviously had found a man who much better suited her personality, her lifestyle than Louis had. And also, Henry now was, oh, there they are, the most powerful man in Europe. That is a lot of power to have as queen now. That's the land that they then were in charge of. No one had more power in Europe than Henry at that time. Now, because so much of her energy was directed toward procreation at this time, Eleanor had relatively little to do with political power her husband had attained, at least in the early year, but she did act as regent for him when he was away, and we do have copies of letters that she dictated that are very forceful, very to the point. This is a no-nonsense person in making judgments. However, the person who was most important in Henry's life, the one from whom he learned statecraft, was his mother Matilda. And so he had 2 women at that point, and he consulted, according to the records, Matilda on all sorts of matters of state. And she was a very astute and experienced political mind. So she was at the forefront at that point of exercising political power through her son And it wasn't that, she was overwhelming him or anything. He went to her for advice. All of that changed, however, in 1167 when, in September of that year, Matilda died. And 9 months earlier, Eleanor had given birth to her final child, a boy named John. Yeah, that John. She was ready to step into her mother-in-law's place as a political force to be reckoned with at that point. But as one historian says, and Henry, like Louis before him, was about to discover that loyalty to her spouse was not the foremost of his wife's qualities. Possibly because of one of Henry's incredibly open relationship with a mistress. He had several mistresses, but one was his favorite. The couple became estranged. And Eleanor just packed up and moved to Poitiers to be with her daughter by Louis Marie de Champagne, who you may have heard of. That's Henry. That's Marie. Okay. Now, Eleanor still remained on fairly good terms with Henry in that she enacted all of his policies, even while she was abroad in his lands there. But something happened. Something changed between Christmas of 1170 and Christmas of 1172 that turned Eleanor from being simply estranged from her husband to actually openly disdaining him, hating him, going after him. One of the theories is that it possibly was the murder of Thomas Becket that turned her against her husband at that time. Whatever the cause, though, we do know that in 1173, Eleanor supported the revolt of her eldest son, Henry, against her husband. And we know, too, that it wasn't just that she supported him. She was a dangerous political force because he arrested her. She was under arrest. She was imprisoned until 1189 when Henry died, and their son, Richard I, took over and let his wife out. Now, this wasn't, leg irons and in the dungeons. It was more like house arrest. And she was allowed out, but always with Henry. If Henry was going somewhere, she had no freedom. So this is a recognition of the kind of power that she had at that time, which is an important thing to note. There you get Richard II.
That's the first.
First, yeah, Richard II is entirely different. I wrote most of my dissertation about him. Yeah, Richard was very devoted to his mother, and she acted as regent for him when he was off on the Third Crusade. In fact, she was the one that when Richard was coming back from the crusade and was taken prisoner, she's the one who got him ransomed and got him freed. And you think, well, she just ruled a little bit while Richard was out of the country. Richard was out of the country most of his reign. He was there for about 9 months. So she had a great deal of political power at that time and wielded it well. And this actually continued then after Richard died and John took over. Until her death in 1204, she was a ruling power behind John as well. So she ended up having an amazing amount of power for a queen who wasn't the one who was actually the ruler. She still wielded power. She had a great deal of agency. She chose her husband, at least the second one, we know that, which is something that Matilda didn't get to experience herself. And isn't that cute? You'd think they almost liked each other. That's their tomb, and actually Richard is there as well, which really makes for an uncomfortable threesome. So that leads us then to Guinevere. We've had 2 historical queens now. What about a fictional queen? Well, parallels have been drawn between Guinevere and somewhat with Matilda, but especially with Eleanor. But nothing can be proved. But the important thing is that what we see in the 12th century is the development of Guinevere as a character as well. Her agency, her queenship develops and grows as well along the way in the Arthurian legend. As it became so popular and was developed and grew and, well, absolutely flourished in the 12th century. That kind of, there we go, started out with Geoffrey of Monmouth, we mentioned earlier, mentioned earlier about Geoffrey's connection with young Henry and tutoring him, and Henry was a huge fan of the Arthurian legend, and Henry actually is the one who was behind finding the skeletons, the grave of Arthur and Guinevere at Glastonbury Abbey. I believe I've been there, I've seen it. Possibly the reason he really wanted to find the grave of Arthur was that there was a lot of unrest in Wales, and if you could find the bones of Arthur, that would put to rest any idea that he was coming back. But he still loved the Arthurian legend anyway. So, History of the Kings of England, around 1136, when you look at when that was produced, it's after Henry's death and before Matilda started her military campaign in England to get the throne. It is the bestseller of the Middle Ages. It's the history of all the kings, but the part that everybody remembers is Arthur. It's when the Arthurian legend really appeared and started getting developed, is in Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain. And we need to remember that today we go, oh yeah, some of those might have existed. It was considered fact back during this time. So it was important. Well, what happens with Guinevere? Guinevere is mentioned in there, but mentioned almost as a marginal Guinevere. Arthur's going along doing all of his things, and all of a sudden he's marrying Guinevere, and you're like, how did they meet? Or who are you know? About all we know is that she has a Roman lineage, which gave him a lot more stature. And then when you look at the fall of Arthur, she had no part in it that we can tell. Anyway, it's all put on Mordred. It is described that Mordred did take the throne and the queen, and it's said in such a way that it's like, those are two aspects of being a ruler that you just take in order to be king. You take the throne, you take the rule, you take the wife who's a symbol of that as well. And it certainly had happened before, although taking might be a little too much, but even when Canute became king of England, he already had a wife, but he married the widow of the previous king, Ethelred. As two wives, that's fine, but then you establish your role as then king of England. So it could very well have been anything, but the fact is we don't know what was going on with Guinevere because nobody tells us. She is so marginalized that we just know that she then, when she hears that Arthur and Mordred are going to fight, she runs off to an abbey. Now, we don't know if that's from guilt or if it's because that's the first time she could get away from Mordred, and she's trying to get away from him, and she goes to the abbey. But noble women, escape bad marriages and things a lot by, going to an abbey even while they were still married. So that wouldn't have been that weird either. We just don't know her motives. They're not talked about. They're not important. And it kind of reflects that idea that she's just a side thought. When you're talking about a king, she doesn't really count that much. And I'll just talk about only these three. There's a lot more Arthurian legends material out there. Take my class in Oxford. One of the greatest Arthurian authors was the Frenchman Chrétien de Troyes, whose patroness just happened to be a person named Marie de Champagne. Yeah, okay. Eleanor's eldest child. It was in her court that whole, parlor game, if you will, the literary device of courtly love was developed and all of that. But one of the interesting things, is that Chrétien was writing then after Eleanor had been Queen of France, was now Queen of England. And then you have something like Eric and Enid, where it's Guinevere actually comes in to a council that Arthur is having with some of his ruling elite, uninvited. They listen to her when she talks to them, and they actually adopt her solution to the matter into consideration. So she clearly has the freedom to give her opinions, to influence decisions. She has agency in here, which Eleanor managed to get. She has a will of her own, and people listen to her. There also was the Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart, where she has total rule over poor Lancelot. But it's really hard to take it too much seriously, because I don't think Chrétien did. He was like, let me do an over-the-top story of courtly love. So that after a while you're going, stop. One of the best scenes, I think, is when he's fighting against Meleagant and Guinevere's up in the tower, and she yells out at him, so he fights. So he can stare at her. She has to tell him, turn around, fight. Chrétien never deals with Arthur's downfall, but the English author Laman, and I realize I don't have a yod, but that should be a yod. If you don't know what a yod is, it's like a 3 drop down. Yeah, if you've ever seen that, but we usually do that then as a Y when you can't. He wrote his Brut, which again was the history of the kings of England. Around 1190, he certainly does bring Guinevere as a direct cause, the most direct cause. So you get the idea that this is such a powerful queen, she could bring down the king. And in some respects, you can kind of see a parallel maybe with Eleanor, but what you can mainly see a parallel with is you have queens who are now noticed, who are now, these are important people you have to take notice of. It won't be for another 400 years that you really have the fruition of queenship when you get to the Tudors, but at least it's a start in that direction, and a start of the discussion of what it means to be a queen. And it's fascinating to me, at least, that Matilda and Eleanor's lives and actions influence so much of history. But then you have Guinevere, then, who reflects that also in the world of literature. So you have art and life, again, intersecting, which I think is a wonderful thing that it often does. Which one imitates the other, I'm never quite sure of. But they do intersect. Thank you.